as you can see, RFID, Holy Grail of Economic Efficiency, or Big Brother's Little Helper. And before I introduce the speaker, I just wanted to thank the IP and Cyber Law Society, in particular the board who got all the logistics ready for this event, as well as the co-sponsors, the American Constitution Society, and the Duke Law and Technology Review. And okay, so our speaker is a 6th-year associate at the Washington, D.C. office of Kirkpatrick Lockhart, where his main practice area is the legal aspects of privacy, information security, and information management. And he regularly speaks on issues relating to privacy, security, and technology. And I dropped my pencil, but and he's actually done this presentation before on behalf of the ABA Subcommittee of Cyber Law. So this is Ben Hayes, and enjoy.
Thank you. Thank you. The nice thing about going to a lecture is you don't get called on, right? Wrong. Mr. Weinstock, you tell us about RFID? Just kidding. Okay, so what is this? What is this all about? We're going to briefly just talk about radio frequency identification technology, explain how it works, the implications of the rollout of this technology, how the law affects this now, how it may affect it in the future, and where this is all going. Okay, what is RFID? It's radio frequency identification. These are little tags or chips that emit radio frequency and use that to identify whatever it is that they're attached to, or at the very least they transmit the information that is on them, regardless of what they're attached to. This is an old new technology. It's been around in its current form for 30 years, and really it goes all the way back to World War II. But the buzz has been created by the fact that it is being rolled out as an alternative to the Uniform Product Code, the barcode. Which would make it pretty much ubiquitous. Since I see a lot of people have drinks, look, there's a barcode on there that could, in time, be replaced with radio frequency ID that communicates with outside parties. So let's talk about how it works. There are 4 components of RFID. There is the tag itself. It is read by a reader. That reader communicates with a database owned by a company that keeps track of all of the tags in that company's stable. And then that database communicates with a central database, which is a global registry of every ID tag, because they're all unique. So there has to be a global directory. So in practice, you have a tag attached to merchandise, and the reader emits radio waves. The tag is able to actually draw electrical power out of the air from the radio frequency that is transmitted to it, and that stimulates the tag to transmit its data, which goes back to the reader. The reader then communicates with a central database and says, okay, I have just read tag number X, and that database says, okay, tag number X, checks back with the central database, and sees that tag X means it is this item produced in such and such a place on such and such a date. And the point of all this is to lead to supply chain efficiency. I will get back to that in a couple of minutes. But here's how it works in practice. With the chip attached to an item or to a case of items or a pallet, it can be read remotely at each point along the supply chain. So when it goes through the factory door and passes the reader there, a read is registered. There's a reader in the back of the truck, so now you can trace that the item has gone through the factory door and onto the truck, and then when it goes into the warehouse, it's checked again. And at each point along the chain, this is registered so that these items, the physical location of these items is known, or at least it's known better. All right, the tags themselves, how do they work? Well, they are 90% antenna. The chips themselves are very small. This one here, which I guess you can't see that well, is only 3/4 of an inch by 1.5 inches, and you see the chip in the middle of it is quite tiny. I'm kicking myself because I have a great little device that was given to me by the general counsel of an RFID manufacturing company. It's a little vial about this big, and it has 150 of the smallest RFID chips in production in it, and they are just sand in the bottom. They are tiny, tinier than the head of a pin. But because it's radio, it has to transmit, and the antenna becomes the bulk of the chip itself. And here you have this copper printed circuit that serves as an antenna, and then all of it is stuck onto a piece of adhesive plastic so that you can actually stick the chip to something. Now, there are different kinds of chips. There are passive chips which have data printed on them, and they can communicate that data, but that's all they're ever going to do. They just keep flashing the same 96 bits of data no matter what. You have semi-passive chips which have internal power source, but still don't turn on until a radio reader communicates with the chip. Now, these can transmit over further distances, but by further distances, I'm talking about maybe 20, 30 feet instead of maybe 5 or 10 feet for passive chips. Then you have active chips. Active chips have their own battery source, and they can phone home. An example of this technology is your cell phone. It is a radio frequency device that is capable of initiating its own communications and that has its own power source. Now, for purposes of privacy, this is an important distinction. There are two kinds of chips: read-only. These are the ones that have information printed on them, and they can communicate that information, but that's all they can ever say. Then there are the read-write chips. These are the rewritable ones, the difference between CDR and CDRW. These ones at least have the potential, as they are read, to also have the information on them updated, so that the chip itself says, I was read at this place at this time by this reader. Or if you want to carry out the paranoid fantasies of privacy advocates, when you go to purchase your diaphragm, it is embedded with information about who you are, where you bought it, when you bought it, how much you paid for it, what credit card you used, and all of that sort of thing. Well, this technology is pretty widespread already. The genie is out of the bottle, so to speak. Implementations include ease of payment systems like EasyPass, the Mobile Speed Pass. In Washington, we have the Metro Smart Card. You don't have to actually touch the card to the reader. You just sort of wave it near the reader, and it's got a range of probably 10 inches that it can read the card. Pet track chips. You can chip your pet with a little RFID reader so that the pet can be tracked. They also put these in livestock. Membership privileges. Seattle Seahawks season ticket holders get with their season tickets a little smart token that enables them to go get concessions without having to go through a checkout line. They just wave their thing when they go in, they get their stuff, they wave it again on their way out. The items themselves have RFID embedded in the packaging, and computers figure out the rest. And finally, access, castle cards, key cards, and product verification. Gibson, that's a Les Paul there, has started putting RFID chips into all of its guitars to prove the authenticity that it is in fact a Gibson Les Paul guitar and it's worth the $1,000 that somebody's going to pay for it. It's not just a Taiwan knockoff that somebody's making a huge profit on. So what is this all about? Well, broadly, there are three goals: to increase supply chain efficiency, to track this, that, and the other, and to monitor products and identify products. Well, let's talk these through a little bit. The cost of getting goods to market is something between $180 and $300 billion a year. So any money that you can save from those costs accrues right to the bottom line. There is a problem in the retail industry known euphemistically as shrinkage. Shrinkage means we sent the goods from the factory, but when they got to the retail store, there were less of them. They have to be going somewhere. And theft is rampant in the retail industry. And out of stock is a problem. There's an estimate that something on the order of $5 to $10 billion a year are lost in sales where people go to a store to buy something and it isn't there. And so they leave and they just don't buy it. And finally, there are efficiencies in terms of personnel and warehouse management. It takes a lot of person power to do inventory, to manually go through cases and items and check every item that's there. The downside, of course, is, those are jobs that employ people. So when you implement this, it creates efficiency because you don't necessarily need those people to do that work. But then you have the other side of that, which is those people have to go somewhere. Tracking, livestock tracking with RFID is being used to help eliminate diseases, keep track of when herds are moved, bought and sold, integrated. This way, when there's an outbreak of mad cow or something, you don't necessarily have to destroy 5 million cattle. You can trace back just the specific cattle that have come into contact with that one, and that obviously saves money and a lot of cows. Humans are starting to be tracked. There was there was one high-profile story where the Mexican Attorney General had himself chipped recently, so that if he was kidnapped, they could find him, or at the very least, they could identify the body. For the same reason, there's a lot of talk in the Department of Defense about chipping soldiers for identification purposes, really. I mean, this is the next dog tags. And then people have been doing it with pets for a long time. Japanese school children in Osaka have started to be chipped, and I think this is a trend that you can expect to see more of in the name of safety and protecting the children. By the time you all have kids, expect people to be trying to sell you microchips to implant in your kids so that you always know that they're safe. Product monitoring and authentication, some of this makes a lot of sense. Aircraft parts, for instance, turns out there's a fairly robust black market in counterfeit aircraft parts. That doesn't make me feel good. Tires, you may remember the Firestone recall debacle of a few years back. They are putting RFID now into tires, both to identify the source and batch of the tire, but also to keep track of the wear and vulnerabilities in terms of pressure differential between the inside and the outside of the tire. High-end goods like electronics and jewelry and other things are being chipped by manufacturers just so that you know that it's the real thing. The proliferation of counterfeit goods is huge, and it's undercutting profits for luxury goods manufacturers, and in order to really stay in business, they need some way to prove that this is what they say it is. Now, I mentioned that the barcode is likely to go away and be replaced by RFID. The folks who are doing this is an outfit called EPC Global. That's Electronic Product Code Global, excuse me. And they are the International Standards Organization of RFID. They are a nonprofit organization that exists on grant money that comes from the retail industry and from other industries. And they are charged with creating global technical standards for RFID. What number of bits of data does it contain, and how are those bits organized? What are the frequencies of the readers? All of these sorts of standards. And their goal is in 10 years to put a unique RFID on every item in the world. Now, they're not going to do that for a number of reasons that we'll get to later, but that is their goal. It's very ambitious, and undoubtedly they are going to integrate RFID into our lives to a degree that today seems unimaginable. So where is all of this? Well, so far 2 billion RFID tags are out in the field, and I would guess that the better half of you probably have one on you now. In terms of, these are not retail items that we're talking about. These are smart cards mainly for the time being, smart tokens. And the reason that they're not on the individual items, they're not on your Pepsi can, et cetera, yet, is that it's just too expensive. The individual tags cost, the cheapest ones cost about 20 cents a piece right now. More of them are in the sort of 50 cents range, even up to $1 or so. And then when you're talking about active tags with their own power source or rewritable tags, now you're talking $10, $12, $15 a tag. And so clearly, you can't put that on a Pepsi. And in fact, there's not likely to be widespread item level tagging until the cost of the tags comes down under a nickel, and ultimately the industry's goal is to create tags that are a penny a tag. And when it gets to that level, expect to find them on everything. So how are they being used? Well, right now they're mainly being used on pallets and cases. Walmart is driving implementation. They started a program 2 years ago requiring their 100 top suppliers. When you talk about the 100 top suppliers of Walmart, you're talking about a lot of goods. So they required their 100 top suppliers to implement RFID by 2005. They've now mandated that their next 200 biggest suppliers implement it by 2006. And they did experiment with item level tagging. There was a trial in a Walmart store, for instance, using lipstick, where each tube of lipstick was chipped, and when somebody picked up the lipstick from the display, it activated a little web camera that was embedded in the display so that the folks in product R&D back at Procter & Gamble in Cincinnati could actually watch in real time how the consumer interacted with their product display. Now, this got the attention of some consumer advocates, as you can imagine, and that program went away. Walmart decided that it was more controversy than it wanted to get involved in for the time being, and furthermore, it wasn't clear that anybody was making any money on the deal. So at this point, RFID is really about the pallet and case level, but it does dribble down to the item level in some ways. For instance, if you buy a HP printer, it comes in its own case, right? The printer itself is the case level. So every individual HP printer that you buy from a Walmart now has an RFID tag on it. Department of Defense followed Walmart's lead. I guess Walmart has now officially eclipsed the US government when this happens. But DoD has now required the bulk of their suppliers to start using RFID, which I think everybody has heard jokes in their lifetime about the efficiency of military procurement and logistics management. So this may ultimately be a good thing and may even save taxpayers money. But it all raises privacy concerns. And let's just talk through some of the scenarios that really concern people. Now, when tagging gets to the item level, and it will, there is the potential that the entire contents of everything in your bag, everything on you, everything you're wearing, could all have unique little identifying chips that are transmitting information. And somebody with a reader can analyze you. I mean, as you walk through the doorway of a store, you could be analyzed and a profile could be built on you. The readers are getting smaller and more malleable. They are now they're capable of being built into doorways or toll booths or just on counters, even woven into carpet. There's one company that has figured out how to embed little disc readers in carpet so that as you walk across the carpet, it analyzes everything that's above it. Did anybody see Minority Report? I was talking about this earlier. There's a scene in the movie where this guy who's a fugitive is trying to hide from the law. He walks into a gap, and a computer monitor turns to face him and says, "Oh, hello, Mr. So-and-so. Good to see you again. Would you like another pair of pants like the last time?" Well, that technology is implementable now. It exists. Now, this is not science fiction. And so what does this all mean? I mean, where could we go with this? Well, if you're using rewritable tags, you could store a lot of information about a person. If I go to buy a book, it might not just be that I bought a copy of Abby Hoffman's Steal Your Book. It's that I bought this copy, this unique copy. how much I paid for it, where I bought it, when I bought it, what I used to pay for it with. And all of that could be correlated back to other databases. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of Axiom Company, but Axiom is a consumer database company that gathers information about consumers from any place that it can get it. And it has information on over 190 million Americans, so you're all in there. And they have more information than the FBI because they're not limited by the Privacy Act of 1974. I mean, there's very little privacy law in the United States. So Axiom has built very sophisticated databases, not only of raw information, but have mined that information to create psychographic, demographic profiles. They know who you are. Well, if you start marrying up that information to this information, the potential exists for you to walk into a store and a display to pop up on your cashier's cash register that, for instance, gives you a grade in terms of what kind of a customer you are. Are you difficult? Are you easy? Are you an easy mark? Do you return things often? Are you a pain? Do you take a lot of their time? So you could get a customer desirability index that might affect how that salesperson treats you. In fact, if you could marry it up with information about income and demographics, there potential exists for dynamic pricing. So what I pay for something costs more because I'm a corporate lawyer than what Jordy pays for it because he's still a law student. Sorry, you're the sacrificial lamb today. So, you know, all of this creates a lot of concern for consumers. And then, you know, that's not even to mention the potential for criminals to use it. I mean, how would you like for criminals to just simply walk down the street carrying an RFID reader, reading what's in your house, and then deciding, you know, whose house to watch while they're out at school? And then, of course, the Orwellian fears of government surveillance and profiling. You know, there are a lot of things going on with the government today. I don't know if you've all heard of, for instance, the CAPS 2 program or the Total Information Awareness programs, but there are a lot of DARPA-sponsored projects for information mining that, you know, really aren't that dissimilar to what Orwell had projected. And, you know, there's a question, I mean, we could talk about the social cost-benefit analysis, you know, safety versus privacy and all of that, but I mean, you put that all aside for a minute and just think about what's happening and where it's all going. I mean, if you have complete transparency of information, what kind of world does that create? What kind of effect does that have on free speech? I think these are all legitimate questions that aren't really being debated because the conversations that are going on in Congress around implementation of RFID and other issues are really just about, is it good for business? And that's the level of debate right now, not is it good for our society? Well, this does have an impact, and consumers sometimes do react. An American privacy advocate named Catherine Albrecht, who's basically taken on RFID, on live TV in Germany exposed the fact that the Metro supermarket chain was using RFID in its smart cards, and it hadn't told anybody that it was doing that. The next day, 1,000 people showed up in the snow outside the Metro store to protest, and in fact, they repealed the program and recalled all of those chips. Now, that's Germany. You know, who knows whether that would happen the same way in the United States. But at least there has been one instance of consumer backlash doing away with an RFID program. I think there's also some question about really whether it's misplaced or not. The concerns that privacy advocates have and the actual ways in which the technology is being used today and that it's contemplated to be used over the next decade don't really line up. Businesses, for the most part right now, are just concentrating on how do I get a 5-cent chip so that I can know where that 6-pack of Coke went and that my employee didn't take it. And consumers are looking at this as, you know, you want to put a chip on my Coke because you want to know that I drink Coke. You know, right now, I think that there's some paranoia on one side and some complacency on the other. So what does the law have to say about RFID? Well, not much. at this point, there is no law anywhere on planet Earth that explicitly includes RFID. Section 5 of the Federal Trade Commission Act prohibits unfair or deceptive trade practices. Business and industry is arguing right now that this is a sufficient legal basis on which to prohibit abuses of RFID, because if it's a deceptive trade practice, if it's an unfair trade practice, if it's just manifestly unfair, some particular use of RFID, then the FTC Act will take care of it. And there's something to that. As it happens now, the Federal Trade Commission enforces the FTC Act with regard to all kinds of privacy issues. For instance, if a website puts up a privacy policy and then they don't live by the terms of that privacy policy, the FTC can enforce against them for an unfair or deceptive trade practice. Although the actual FTC Act doesn't say anything about privacy or websites or anything. So there may be something to the argument that the FTC Act is sufficient to manage this issue. State invasion of privacy torts. I was talking before today's presentation with someone about this, and I said, I think it'd be really interesting to analyze the impact of state invasion of privacy torts on RFID, because there's a lot of common law there. There are different shades of how invasion of privacy torts are recognized in different states, and I think it would be very interesting to analyze. I haven't done that analysis, so I can't really say that there's anything there or not. Privacy advocates are pushing for new laws now. They want it all regulated before it even gets any further down the road. And as has been the case with all kinds of technological implementations, industry is saying, let the market correct the issue. If people don't want to buy it, they won't buy it. So let's just let market forces take care of it. And I guess I can understand that point of view, and I think it's correct up to a point. I guess where it breaks down is if the tags become totally ubiquitous, if they're on everything, then what choice does the consumer have? But we're not there yet. So what about outside the United States? Step back. I don't know. I won't assume that anybody knows much about European privacy law, but let's put it this way. It's a lot more robust and takes the issue of privacy a lot more seriously than it's taken by US law. There is a directive from the EU Commission that requires every member state of the EU, which is now 25 countries, to implement into their national law a general privacy law that applies to all collection and use of personal data by both business and government, really anyone that does it. And it is, in general, a lot more stringent than US law. But interestingly, it probably doesn't affect RFID. Why? Because unless you get into rewritable chips that actually record your identity and marry it up to product information, then the information that is generated by those chips isn't really information about you. It's information about the product to which that chip is attached. And even if I have the ability to know the contents of your handbag, I still don't necessarily know who you are. Unless I can marry that information up to your identity some way. So for the most part, even though Europe's got very strict privacy laws, they don't apply to this. And that is a matter of some concern in Europe and is being discussed right now. So what should be done? I think that when you tell consumers that when they walk out of a store, their purchases can be totally transparent to some third party sitting in the parking lot pointing a ray gun at you, that makes a lot of people nervous. Not everyone, some people don't care, I understand. But for the people that it does make nervous, what do we do about this? Do we need new laws, or is there another approach? Well, the most widely discussed alternative approach is a kill function. You have those theft prevention devices that you have to walk through at the drugstore, right? And it beeps if you've stolen something, but it also often beeps when the person at the counter simply forgot to deactivate the little tag in there, which is an RFID tag, I should add. You get false positives all the time. Well, so you could have a little kiosk by the door where you could kill the RFID chips. But retail industry is not likely to make this easy for anybody for a couple of reasons. They want to create further efficiencies by embedding warranty and product recall information into those chips, so that if you want to make a warranty claim, look for this in the near future. If you have disabled the RFID chip to which is attached to the item, then you have voided your warranty. There are other reasons too. In the pharmaceutical industry, you can use RFID attached to a pill container, for instance. There's this neat little device that's now on the market where there's an RFID chip on your pill bottle, and then you have this little device which is actually a sensitive scale that's hooked up to the internet. And so you put your pill bottle on the little scale, and it can tell, because it's sensitive, how many pills are in the bottle. And so it will tell you when it's time to take your pills. It will tell you if you've already taken your pills. And if you haven't taken your pills in a couple of days, it can automatically call your doctor or call your grandson and alert folks to the fact that there is a problem. Well, you know, for older people living alone, that's a great implementation of this technology, and it could probably save people's lives, extend people's lives. And it's one more reason not to kill an RFID chip on your way out the door. So the issue of whether or not consumers will have the control over whether a chip is alive or dead once they leave a store is likely to get kind of political and to be somewhat contentious. Another option is generic tagging. Instead of making the information that a particular chip has very specific, you could make it very general. So, you know, if I buy a sleeve of golf balls, the RFID chip could say, this is a sleeve of Titleist golf balls, not this is this particular sleeve of Titleist golf balls that was made at this factory on this date, etc. Of course, the problem there is that undermines the supply chain efficiency that they're trying to achieve with rolling out this technology in the first place. So we've talked about the realm of the possible. What about the realm of the likely? Well, right now there is a push to create an object naming system that is linked to RFID tags to create the Internet of Things. This would make it, right now you've got all this proprietary hardware, right? You've got the chips, you've got to buy the reader from the same company that makes the chips. You need special software and interfaces, and it's all very expensive to roll out, and furthermore, it only works with interoperable systems. So the goal now is to make the chip data and the readers and all of the software Windows friendly, Linux friendly, and internet compatible, so that all I need is an ordinary gateway computer in order to track all of my products worldwide in real time. And if they can actually roll that out, it will create huge supply chain efficiencies. Money will be made, no question. And furthermore, the RFID technology costs are falling quickly to make this possible. So as those costs fall, this becomes more common. I said I'd talk about where the technology is going in order to reduce the costs. Well, so right now you've got this piece of plastic with a piece of copper printed on it and then a chip embedded in it. And that's a lot of manufacturing. You've got to manufacture the plastic, you've got to manufacture the adhesive, you've got to process the copper and print it, you have to process the chip, you have to integrate it, you have to embed data on it. That takes a pretty sophisticated manufacturing process. Where this is going is chips that are made to be writable once, so that you don't have to embed information onto the chip as part of the manufacturing process. You can do it once the tag is written, and then once once data is put on it the first time, then that data is persistent. But much more interesting is the problem of the antenna and the substrate to which it's all attached to. There are companies out there that are developing packaging that integrates metallic ink that serves as the antenna, and then the chip is embedded right into the packaging, and the packaging itself is the substrate. So you eliminate the need for the plastic and the adhesive, you eliminate the need for the extra copper antenna. It is the actual box that you buy the product in that has the RFID right in it. And when that technology develops, you will get the cost of individual chips down to a penny. Right now, actually, Pepsi has been experimenting with an implementation where all they have to do is print a chip into the can, and then the can itself becomes an antenna. And more and more of that will be happening. This actually creates some business opportunities if anybody's looking for some. I've been thinking about this because all of the technology that is used to create packaging is going to change. It's all going to be replaced with technology that creates RFID packaging. So, you know, look for packaging industry stocks. It's definitely a growth area. Medical information, smart. What are those called? The tags that diabetics wear? Medical alert. Look for smart medical alert tags that don't just say whether you're diabetic or not, but in fact have all of your medical records going back to childhood in there. And I think that everybody can imagine reasons why that would be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on who gets that information and how it's used. Law enforcement and intelligence. Anybody see Enemy of the State? Where they got Will Smith and just covered him in tracking technology. And it wasn't until he figured it all out and basically stripped naked and threw everything over the side of a building that he was able to get away. Well, that's not really science fiction. They can do that now. And I would tend to bet that a few years down the road, as this technology becomes more widespread, that you're going to see politicians wanting to chip sex offenders, child abusers, deadbeat dads, all of the villains of society are likely to be chipped first because we need to know where they are, and we need to keep track of them. And this may roll out over time to anybody with a criminal record, or anybody with this characteristic, or anybody working in such and such industry. It will come very incrementally, and it will target the least sympathetic members of society first. But I think that by the time that we're old people, there are going to be a lot of people with microchips in them, and there are going to be a lot of people that think it's a good idea, and maybe it is. Finally, the EPC. I guess I'm running behind here. The EPC's vision of putting a unique ID on every item in the world is not going to happen simply because of the costs involved. If you've ever been to a third world country, think about it. They're not going to roll this out in Honduras. They're not going to roll this out in Burma. But it will be rolled out throughout the Western world. Why? Because we're rich and we can afford it. It will appear on more expensive items at first, and it will gradually dribble down to the less expensive items. But there are some obstacles. China manufactures most of the goods sold in this country today. And China is in the process of trying to create their own standards for RFID. They want their own chip technologies, their own manufacturers to get all of the business. And so they're creating a competing standard, and that, of course, puts EPC Global in a difficult place because if China doesn't want to play along, it's pretty difficult to mandate what they're going to do. And there is a little bit of a power struggle going on right now over dominance in standards, and it's unclear who's going to win that fight. And simply, the worst fears of the privacy advocates are not going to happen because they're just too expensive and there's not enough money to be made. I mean, this is being done by business with a profit motive, right? If it's not profitable to spy on people, then they're not going to spy on people. And right now, it's a long way from profitable to spy on people. The Procter & Gamble example with the lipstick that I mentioned, I mean, that was not profitable. They were just spending money to see if it produced any interesting results. So until it becomes profitable to spy on people and do dynamic pricing or whatever else, then it's just not going to happen. And there are some other problems too. There are some technological problems. RFID, it turns out, is hindered by water. And when you're trying to operate in the vicinity of water or with items that have a lot of water in them, like sodas or like people, then the readers don't work as well. And so there's that issue. And then finally, there's some bandwidth issues. this takes up a lot of spectrum. If you start putting these readers everywhere, you got a lot of radio waves flying around. You already have a lot of cell phones and other technology that's utilizing that bandwidth, so it has to be low frequency, because if it's high frequency, it'll create interference. And the FCC is in the process now of sorting all of this out, but it's likely to remain pretty low frequency, which means that just as a matter of physics, you're not going to get readers that read at a distance of much more than 30 to 50 feet ever, unless, you know, the NSA may get some special stuff, but most of us are probably not going to have to deal with that. And eventual legislation probably will be likely, but I think it will be legislation that's geared at the uses of the information that is generated, and not at controlling the technology itself. Because after all, it's benign in and of itself. It's what you do with the information that you get. You know, when you use it to be a stalker, or when you use it to be an identity thief, or when you use it to you know, create some scary Brave New World, that's the problem. The information itself is not the problem. So I think that the laws will limit not the collection of information, but it will probably mandate notice. It'll probably mandate, you know, create criminal penalties for misusing the information. It may well get to a point where you know, you have to have a reason or a license to obtain a reader, so that not just anybody can have a reader. And I suspect ultimately that it is going to be the law that certain kinds of criminals and certain other types of individuals in this society will be chipped by, you know, by legal order. And I think that's where we're going. So that's time. I'd be happy to take any questions that anybody has. All right, you're fed. You've had your lecture. Yeah?
I did have a question. So you mentioned spectrum, and that these things actually have to use certain portions of the radio waves. Is this licensed spectrum from the FCC? Is it open to anybody? And has anybody thought of what happens if somebody creates like a little card that they can stick in their palm tops that would broadcast whatever RFID they want?
This is not my area of expertise. The average RFID reader operates at 900 megahertz, which I understand is pretty low. But I believe that it is licensed spectrum, but I'm not positive about that. No, actually, no. I take that back. I think it all happens. In fact, I think that the FCC has said that it has to happen in the unlicensed spectrum area because there's just not enough spectrum. If this rolls out to the level and degree that has been proposed, it's just you're talking about way too many radio waves eating up bandwidth. Yep.
But as far as addressing being able to broadcast, you know, fake ones, it seems like there's not really much protection for people just being able to mimic whatever radio frequency they want.
Well, don't forget that the chips are each unique. They're transmitting a unique identifying number. So you would have to, you know, basically steal a chip out of a Gibson Les Paul and put it on a fake Les Paul in order to do what you're proposing, unless you're asking a different question.
I guess it seems that if it's just broadcasting this information wherever and anyone can receive it with a reader,
Yep.
then, I mean, just like any other kind of computer program, it can just be mimicked and copied.
Well, maybe. You know, this technology is not very secure, and there isn't much that's going to prohibit somebody from hacking it. I mean, where it gets more interesting is that, you know, VeriSign, which is the big certificate authority now, has gotten the contract with EPC Global to do the unique central database that keeps track of all RFID tags everywhere. You know, if somebody could get into that database, then, you know, they might be able to do some damage. And then, you know, there are questions about, could you mimic a tag? You know, could you, and I'm sure all of this will happen. I mean, clever criminals are probably out there thinking about this now. Could you reprogram a tag? There's one RFID, anti-RFID sort of radical activist group that is purportedly working on a technology that will just reprogram one. It'll change a couple of digits, and, you know, to create chaos, so that when I take my my tube of Crest toothpaste to the checkout counter, it thinks that it's a table saw or something. Yeah, I don't know. The technology is bound to become more secure over time to deal with that problem, but until there are some high-profile hacking incidents that cost somebody a lot of money, it's not going to happen.
As far as cost preventing some of the fears, I mean, wouldn't you have an incentive to collect as much data as you possibly can and figure out uses later, or sell it to someone who would use it?
Well, you would think so, but the problem is it ultimately becomes expensive just to have that data. I have clients internet businesses who started out in the late 90s with that business model, but now they've got this vast quantity of data that they don't really know what to do with, and it's costing them a lot of money to keep it. And so now they're all coming back to me saying, all right, well, how do we differentiate between the stuff we need and the stuff we don't need? It's a general principle of privacy or data protection that any given database, the accuracy of any given database degrades by a fairly large percentage every year. And after about 5 to 7 years, it's largely worthless because there's so much bad data in there. As people move, they change their names, they die, their circumstances change, and the value of a data file at any given time is going to degrade over time. So, there are entities out there that are doing that, like Axiom. I mean, that's their business model, is collect as much data as possible and sell it to whoever's buying it. But they're always fighting a rearguard action against the decay of that data because they have to be able to show that direct marketing results based on data that they sold were higher than the company that would have achieved on its own, and that's the only thing that keeps them in business. So they have to be constantly looking for ways to update that data, corroborate it against other data. But some of the most sophisticated uses of new artificial intelligence technology are being applied to data mining to basically catch duplicates, correct incorrect information, and things like that. In the back?
Have you heard anything about Las Vegas using RFIDs for both chips and playing cards to eliminate dealer mistakes and betting errors?
I haven't, but that sounds very plausible. Now, the latest I heard was resorts in Ibiza off the coast of Spain chipping people so that they can just leave a credit card at the desk and then they don't have to actually, sober up for the next week. Anybody else? All right, well, thanks very much for coming and having me.
Yeah.